Back in Berea here today for Andrew Berry's end-of-season press conference. Of course, we heard from Kevin and some players on Sunday, but here on Monday, Andrew Berry wrapped up the season. And the big thing, Mary Kay, is he started it off with a little bit of news, unexpected news. Deshaun Watson suffered a setback in his recovery from an Achilles injury, and Andrew didn't offer many details, but I think the big takeaway here is any plans for Deshaun in 2025, maybe playing for this football team, just were completely thrown into question when we found out that he had a setback with his injury.
That is absolutely right, Dan, because if he has to undergo another surgery, his 2025 season is pretty much wiped out. And the way that I've been viewing it is that not only would he come back and compete with another quarterback for the starting job, but there was probably a good chance he was going to end up as the number 2. And now that is all thrown into jeopardy. He might not see the field at all in 2025. And if he doesn't, he could be completely done in a Browns uniform. So this, in my mind, has a sense of finality to it. And it was a bombshell, I thought, that Andrew kind of dropped on us today. They don't know very many details, but I'm told that Deshaun will be traveling down to North Carolina again to visit with his surgeon, Dr. Bob Anderson, kind of see what's going on and see if he does actually have to have another procedure. Big news. Andrew said it won't significantly impact their quarterback acquisition plans for the offseason, but it definitely could have an impact on what happens just in terms of the quarterback depth chart at the start of the season.
Yeah, Ashley, obviously without having many details, you kind of, you sort of look at the omissions from Andrew Berry, and the fact of the matter is when he was asked if Deshaun would need another surgery, he didn't say no. So obviously that doesn't mean he's going to, but as Mary Kay was saying, it didn't rule out that possibility. And then, of course, if that happens, it probably throws his 2025 out the window.
It does. And I think you just compare Andrew Berry's season-ending press conference this year to last year and the tone in which he talks about Deshaun Watson. It's just all totally different. And we talked about that a lot in 2023. The last thing we saw of Deshaun, even though he suffered that season-ending shoulder injury, was very good production in an improbable win in Baltimore when he went 14-14 in the second half. They don't have a performance like that to hang their hats on now. And now you're looking at all of this missed time with the Achilles, adding extra missed time onto that. And he really seemed to highlight today the fact that Deshaun Watson has not been able to stay consistently available throughout his time here. So just to me, a totally different tone than he had this time last year.
Oh, and by the way, they have the number 2 pick as well. So that just throws a whole nother factor into this quarterback decision. Now let's talk about a player that Andrew Berry said he expects to be here. He expects to be here throughout his career and have a path from Cleveland to Canton, and that is Myles Garrett. And of course, Mary Kay, that is significant because Myles Garrett not so long ago expressed some frustration with the direction of this team and didn't rule out the idea of asking out if a full rebuild was on its way.
Yeah, Andrew seems very, very confident that Myles will be back. So I'm guessing that they must have talked, and it probably had a pretty good outcome. Now, having said that, Myles told us the other night that he will take some time after the season to let things settle in, let his body settle down a little bit before making any decisions. And the kicker, I thought, was the fact that he threw in there the notion that he's probably going to want a contract extension. So we'll see how that goes, but Andrew sounded so positive about all of this today. I'm guessing that it will have a happy ending.
I feel like Myles and his agent probably have saved all of those times that a Browns personnel person has sat at the front of the podium here in Berea and made the case for him being the best defensive player in football. I think that's something they might like taking to the negotiating table here if it reaches that point. But Ashley, the really important thing still is Myles is going to be here, at least if Andrew Berry has his way.
Yeah, and Kevin Stefanski on Sunday as well was very adamant. He just answered in the affirmative when asked if he thought Myles would be here next year. And then Andrew today, one of the lines about he has a direct ticket from Cleveland to Canton, and he expects him. He went as far as to say, I expect him to retire a Brown. So it definitely just had an optimistic tone to it all. And maybe this was all, at the end of the day, some expert gamesmanship by Myles Garrett to get that extension if that's what ends up happening.
Okay, let's ping pong back the other way to another player who we aren't sure about his future here in Cleveland, and that is Nick Chubb. I know Browns fans don't love to hear that, but the reality is, unlike last year, Nick Chubb is no longer under contract after this season, after this 2024 season, so he's headed for free agency. And Mary Kay, of course, that triggers the possibility that maybe Nick Chubb might not be a Cleveland Brown. If he is, it's probably going to be at a very reduced salary.
Right, and Andrew Berry was non-committal about it today. It wasn't like in the past, even last offseason, when he vowed that the last time we saw Nick wasn't going to be on that field in Pittsburgh when he suffered the devastating knee injury. It wasn't like that today. It was very much, hey, he's going to be in our ring of honor, and you know how I feel about Nick Chubb. That also had a note of finality to it to me. Now, never say never, because things can change. If he comes back strong from his broken foot and they work things through where he comes back on some very small incentive-laden contract, anything can happen in that regard. But it almost sounded like the end of Nick Chubb to me.
Now, the Browns could benefit, though, from the fact that he never quite looked like Nick Chubb when he was out there, and Ashley Mary Kay mentioned that broken foot, so he's coming off of injury, so maybe the Browns can benefit from that. But even if they do come up with some sort of deal for Nick, I would imagine it would also be in a very different role.
Yeah, I do think either way, they're going to need to look at that running back room. I thought it was a mistake they made in each of the last 2 years by not going out and trying to add a significant piece there. And we know how Jerome Ford is at this point. But even if you don't have Nick Chubb, I don't think you can 100% rely on Jerome Ford as your top back for you. But 100% I agree with Mary Kay on this. It just had a totally different tone, much like Deshaun Watson, compared to 2023 today. But, you know, they did, like you said, Dan, I think what they have working in their favor if they do want to bring Nick back is the fact that his market value isn't going to be like what Saquon Barkley's was a year ago. They might be able to do this on a reasonable deal if both parties want that.
Okay, this is our last video here of this season, at least. And we'll be back here when they hire a coordinator, all of that fun stuff. But we can go a little long here because there is one other guy we need to talk about, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. Hopeful has been the word we've heard in regards to JOK. First from Kevin, and then Andrew echoed that today. So, Mary Kay, I mean, I guess it's good that they haven't just come out and said that he's not going to be back. But again, to hear the word hopeful that he'll be back next year still doesn't necessarily instill a ton of confidence.
No, it really doesn't. And they are leaving open the possibility that JOK could be done because of that scary neck injury. No one knows exactly how or when he will be able to come back from it. If they knew something about that, or if they had something great to report, we would have heard about that by now. Instead, the last we heard from linebackers coach Jason Tarver, he was talking about how JOK is still traveling around to doctors trying to figure things out. Once again, that doesn't inspire a ton of confidence that he is on this trajectory right back to the football field. So we'll have to see how that goes. But I think Browns fans who obviously love JOK might have to get a little bit mentally prepared for the notion that he might not be back in 2025.
Yeah, and Ashley, of course, look, we can argue about who's a core player and who's not, but one of those guys that I don't think you could make any argument against, Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah. It would be a big blow to this defense if he wasn't in it.
It would be. I mean, I think he's easily in your top three defenders alongside Myles Garrett and Denzel Ward at this point. I think you can even make the argument, I would make the argument, that he's been Andrew Berry's best draft pick during his Cleveland tenure, considering where they got him and the value he's brought. He's maybe your best tackler. He's maybe your best athlete on that defense, one of them, one of your hardest players. I mean, we saw the blow to that room when he was out, and Jordan Hicks was in and out for a while. So it'll be really unfortunate if he's unable to come back. But like Mary Kay said, I think it's one of those things where we would have heard by now about his progress if it really was more optimistic than how we're saying it right now.
Okay, Andrew Berry doesn't usually make a lot of news, but today was a very newsy day when he wrapped up the season. So we covered it all at cleveland.com/Browns.